Beneath Kaladin's storm-racked skies, a poet's ink became a blade. Turning verses unsung, coordinates in rhythm untraceable, supply routes in rhyme as song died it died at Arrakeen. Harkonnens mistook his untraceable lament for lost love. Never but its echoes never did guess the desert's breath carried their doom. A swordmaster's final act, turning ballads into a Fremen whisper, unsung, untraceable. His song died at Arrakeen, but its echoes never did. The Bene Gesserit's art was never just beauty. Gurney's verses, deceptively simple, wove Fremen dialect into meter-coded rhythms that mapped spice routes, whispered well locations. Each stanza's cadence trained ears to detect subtle shifts in Harkonnen patrol patterns. His sword sang of love, but its blade carved doubt into the occupier's certainty. The Harkonnens dismissed the poet as a relic, unaware his romantic refrains taught Fremen to weaponize their own silence. A single line repeated in desert winds could unravel supply lines, redirect harvests, turn the sand against boots. What did the Harkonnens overlook? That art, when sharpened by purpose, becomes a scalpel. Gurney's final verse was no elegy, it was a spark. A whisper passed hand to hand until it burned. What secret weapon bends empires without a scream? The answer lies in the blood. Gurney was both poet and killer, a blade forged by Atreides' duty and Bene Gesserit design. His verses, sweet with longing, carried poison. Each stanza, a thread in a net meant to strangle the Harkonnens' grip on Arrakis. The Bene Gesserit do not train killers, they sculpt architects of ruin. Gurney's quill was as lethal as his sword, though few saw the wound. The asterisk song of the sword asterisk sang of love, but its rhythm mapped fractures in Harkonnen command. A line about dunes that whisper did not romanticize sand it named wells where spice ran thin. A verse on chains that Ben did not mourn slavery, it whispered supply caravan dates. The Harkonnens read for beauty, not meaning. They heard a conquered man's lament, not the dagger turning in their ribs. Gurney's hands, calloused by steel, trembled as they wrote. The Bene Gesserit taught him, art is a slower, quieter death. His poetry spread like a plague among the Fremen, a code only the initiated could decode. Each performance a sacrament. Each stanza a spark. The Harkonnens never guessed their poet was their pyre. Dread curls in the air between verse and violence. What does a weapon sound like when it wears a sonnet? Gurney's truth was buried in plain sight, a secret weapon not of steel, but of silence. The Harkonnens ruled with screams. They did not hear the song that killed them. The blade that cut deepest was wrapped in melody. Gurney Halleck's verses, sung low beneath Arrakis' winds, carried no maps, no numbers. Only shadows of strategy, woven into the cadence of Fremen tongues. The Harkonnens, masters of brute force, mistook his ballads for laments of a broken man. They did not know the dunes remembered every word. Fremen children learned war in whispers. Their elders spun battle plans into parables, hid siege tactics in desert hymns. Gurney, once a soldier of the Atreides, became their scribe. He drank the water of their oral law, let it shape his bones. His poetry became a cipher, each stanza, a seed planted in the minds of those who knew where to listen. A line about a sword that thirsts might mean a hidden well. A verse on the worm's first breath could mark the moon's shadow over a Harkonnen supply line. Paul Atreides, the Kwisatz Haderach, did not inherit Fremen cunning through blood. He learned it by kneeling in their firelit circles, by tasting the dust of their stories. Gurney's verses, passed from throat to ear, became Paul's silent tutors. When the Fremen rose, their attacks followed rhythms only they could decode. A poem's refrain became the signal for a sandstorm of spears. The Harkonnens, blind to the weight of words, laughed at Gurney's romance. They did not hear the drumbeat in his meter, the coordinates hidden in couplets. Their spies parsed his lines for treason, found only a grieving man's love song, but the Fremen knew. They knew how Bene Gesserit discipline could harden a poet's soul, how Gurney's training in subterfuge made him a sculptor of meaning. His verses were not art, they were a labyrinth, each performance a deposition of knowledge, each recital a strike. A single line, repeated in different dialects, could synchronize a revolt across the desert. The Harkonnens, who ruled by fear, could not fathom a weapon forged in silence. By the time they realized the poetry was a war machine, the Fremen had already buried their chains in the sand. Gurney's final verse, sung as the walls of Arrakis crumbled, carried no sorrow, only the quiet triumph of a secret kept too long. The Harkonnens had drowned in their own noise. Gurney's song, sharp as a stiletto, had cut them without a sound. The voice, a Bene Gesserit gift, Ben's speech to carry layered truths. Gurney bent verse. His quatrains, draped in courtly longing, hid Fremen rhythms, their war chants, their warnings. A stanza about the desert's hunger was a signal. A line on the worm's silent dance became a trigger. The Harkonnens dismissed his ballads as the whine of a broken man. They did not hear the code, each performance an ambush. Gurney recited in their gilded halls, his voice a scalpel. The Fremen, Gurney undertones, in there found guild maps in Hall's metaphors. A mention of sand that bites meant strike the spice caravans. A sigh for dunes that bleed meant stir the worm's nest. The Harkonnens, blind to the poetry's poison, laughed. They had conquered a poet, they had not conquered the song. The Fremen's worm, sacred and terrible, became the poem's weapon. Gurney wove its symbolism into every refrain. To the untrained, it was a myth. To the Fremen, it was a call. When the Harkonnens raised a sayach, Gurney's verses whispered of vengeance. When their ships prowled the dunes, his rhymes spoke of the worm's awakening. The Harkonnens did not know they had become the verse's villain. The final stanza was a spark. A single line, let the wind carry the sword's name, ignited the Fremen's resolve. The sword was Paul, the wind, the voice. The Harkonnens, in their hubris, had no shield for a war sung into existence. Their arrogance, their noise, drowned out the warning notes. Gurney's choice was not in the blade, it was in the breath between words, a weapon forged in silence, sharper than any knife. The Harkonnens fell not by force, but by the weight of a verse they never understood. The Harkonnens scorned the Fremen's songs, Gurney's verses, a blade weaving codes in their own tongues. How does a poet's whisper bring a house to its knees, each verse a fracture, each stanza a spark? The Harkonnens never saw the desert bloom beneath their boots, a war fought in ink, not blood. What did their conquest forget to fear? The desert breathes in verses. Gurney Halleck fell at Arrakis, his blood soaking into dunes that would one day cradle his words. The Fremen took his quill, not his sword. They read between the lines of asterisk song of the sword asterisk, a hymn of love, a map of shadows. Each stanza hid the rhythm of water sources, the cadence of hidden paths. A single metaphor, asterisk the blade that drinks the sun asterisk, became 1,000 whispers in the dark. The Harkonnens marched, blind to the poetry etched into Fremen tongues. They mocked the conquered poet's lullabies, never hearing the war cry buried in his lament. Sand shifted. Verses spread like seeds in the storm. When the Fremen rose, their chants echoed Gurney's lines, turning Harkonnen strongholds into hollow shells. A weapon forged in grief, sharpened by silence. What did the Harkonnens mistake for surrender was a sword unsheathed. The cost of a poet's death, a revolution sung into being. Beneath the Arrakis sun, where dunes whisper secrets to the wind, Gurney Halleck's verses became more than lament. The Fremen, keepers of 1,000-year oral forge, heard what others dismissed as romantic drivel metaphors of thirst masking supply routes, ballads of love veiling assassination protocols. Each stanza a cipher, each refrain a map. The Bene Gesserit's voice, honed in shadowed breeding programs, had taught them to embed meaning within meaning. A single phrase could command loyalty or signal an ambush, its power lying not in what was said, but how it was asterisk felt asterisk. The Harkonnens, masters of brutality, never guessed their own cruelty had birthed a weapon. Gurney's exile to the deep desert, his forced role as a conquered poet, was no accident. The Fremen had shaped him into a vessel. His song asterisk of the sword that sleeps in sand asterisk, a hymn to lost glory, outlined the precise timing of waterhauler caravans. Asterisk, where the scorpion's tail meets the sky asterisk, described the thermal weaknesses of their armor. Every line a thread in a tapestry of collapse, they sang it in the stillness between heartbeats. In the flicker of a candle during whispered prayers. The Harkonnen spymasters, blind to the subtlety of a culture they'd dismissed as primitive, mistook Fremen devotion for superstition. They did not know how a people who memorized their history in verse could encode entire wars within a single elegy. When the Fremen rose, it was not with a roar, but a sigh. A century of patience exhaled in coordinated strikes. Gurney's final stanza, performed before a Harkonnen court, sealed their doom. The words, sweet as date wine, carried the poison of precision. By the time the Harkonnens realized their supply lines had turned to dust, their enemies were already in their throats. Art, they learned too late, is not passive. It is a blade honed in time, its edge invisible until it draws blood. What does a conqueror do when the conquered speak in riddles, when every love letter is a death warrant? The Fremen had answered in silence, and in that silence they redefined power. Gurney's verses now lie etched in sandstone and memory, each stanza a cipher, each metaphor a star chart. The Fremen sang of love, but their melodies mapped spice routes and aquifer thefts. What the Harkonnens dismissed as romantic drivel became a subtle blade. Paul's visions wove these riddles into inevitability. He saw the lines as blueprints, not ballads. The Harkonnens, blind to the poetry's purpose, walked into sieges they mistook for festivals. Their spies parsed syllables for weakness, finding only beauty. A beauty that hid the Fremen's unity, a unity the Harkonnens claimed to have shattered. Gurney's sword never drew blood again, but his words cut deeper. They turned every wedding chant into a war cry, every lullaby into a directive. The Harkonnens' arrogance was their undoing. They never learned that people who speak in riddles can dismantle an empire without lifting a blade. The poetry's truth was not in its words, but in what they omitted, a silence that grew louder than any scream. And in that silence the Fremen's legacy endures, not as victims, as architects of their own reckoning. The Baron's cruelty carved its name in sand, Gurney's verses carved deeper, a stillsuit woven with syllables, each line a reservoir of defiance. The Harkonnens shattered Fremen minds with thirst, with fear. They did not hear the subtext humming beneath Gurney's ballads, his quatrains mapped waterholes. His metaphors named the stars that guided unseen migrations, a lexicon of survival disguised as lament, a weapon not forged in workshops. Not wielded with blade or bullet, but buried in the rhythm of a song that outlived every massacre. The Harkonnens mistook poetry for propaganda. They did not know how to kill an idea dressed as a melody. The stillsuit silence taught the Fremen to endure. Gurney's silence taught them to remember. Every stanza a seed, every stanza a trap. The Harkonnens, masters of terror, left blind by their own arrogance. They could not see the war they funded with every verse they let be sung. What does an empire built on cruelty fear most? Not the sword, not the storm. The quiet persistence of a song that becomes a civil. Letting their strategies slip away, grain by grain. The final mirror, a poet's mouth as the blade that never bled, a people's knowledge preserved in verse. The Harkonnens conquered a planet. The Fremen conquered memory, and memory once awakened never thirsts again. Memory once awakened carves its lessons into the bones. Gurney Halleck's verses were not mere songs, they were the Fremen's silent siege. Each stanza a whisper beneath the dunes, each metaphor a thread unraveling the Harkonnens' grip. The Harkonnens mistook the poetry's lament for a lover's grief, its odes to the sword as romantic folly. But the Fremen knew every line was a seed planted in the wind, every rhyme a map to the desert's true power. The sandworms, ancient and unblinking, bore witness. Their roars became the chorus of rebellion, their tunnels the veins through which resistance pulsed. The Harkonnens ruled the surface, but the Fremen held the depths where memory became weapon and verse became blade. The desert does not forget. It teaches, and in its silence the worm stirs. Asterisk, the desert is a teacher, and the worm is its voice. Asterisk, Frank Herbert. Asterisk, Dune. Asterisk. What secret weapon did the Harkonnens overlook? Gurney Halleck's verses, cloaked in romance, carried Bene Gesserit voice-encoded commands. Each stanza a cipher. Each refrain a trigger, supply lines faltered, loyalties fractured. The Harkonnens